Welcome, everybody. This is what our faith demands. We are in our normal configuration +1. We're thankful to More Perfect Union, Jewish Partnership for Democracy, for supporting our efforts. Today, in addition to myself, Rabbi Jonathan Freirich, we have with us our normal partnership with Reverend Raquel Alston and Reverend Tanya Spencer. And joined with us is our special guest from, where are you today?
I'm in Maryland now. I'm in North Bethesda.
We have Rabbi Shais Rishon. It is our first virtual plus session. Normally we do this just in the office, but we're thrilled to expand.
I'm honored.
And I want to say that many people know Rabbi Rishon under the moniker, the nom de plume, Manish Tana. So Rabbi Rishon, I'm going to ask you to explain two things by way of introduction. One, because I don't want to explain Manish Tanaka because it's so much more fun for you two. So one, explain your writing name. And number two, in the wake of the publication of your new book, The Souls of Black Jewish Folk, the key term for everybody to know about from your book, I feel like, is this term Edot Chemdata. So that's two questions for you.
So the first question, Manashtana, one, Pesach is my favorite holiday, Passover. It's not my favorite one to prepare for, but once it's here, I love being in it. And when I first started writing, it was in that space where everyone had like a name, right? So Yitz Jordan was Wylove at that time. Eliza Hausman was Jermaine Akana. You had Shirley Gendler Price, who was Mocha Juden. You had Sasha King, who was a mixed Black Jewish girl or mixed Jewish Black girl. I can't remember the order. And so there was me entering that space and also coming from like a comic book background, the opportunity to have an alter ego. Clearly, I was going to jump at. But Manashana is the first of sort of those four Manashtana questions that happen at the Seder service, Passover night. So the full question is Manishtana Halayla Hazeh. What makes this night so different from any other night? So in my work, I'm playing on that concept of Manishtana, what makes this Jew so different from any other Jew? Which is an interesting question because the answer is simultaneously everything and nothing. So when it comes to the book and the term Edot Chemdata, it arose from the need to distinguish between African Americans who are adherents to the mainstream forms of rabbinical denominational Judaism, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Renewal, et al., and between the various Hebrew Israelite sort of denominations and congregations. So we're often conflated as being the same thing, especially when you come around the term Black Jews, it gets appropriated and used in different ways. So Edot Chemdata is specifically planting the flag down towards African American Jews who are part of mainstream Judaism. So it's an acronym and a play on a word because Chemdata is the Aramaic form of Chemda or Chemdat, which means precious or cherished. And it's a acronym for Chilulim, Masortim, Bedatim, Shalatifutsa Afrikai, traditional, secular, and religious Jews of the African diaspora. So that's where that sort of term comes from. I got to introduce it at Harvard at a symposium around Black and Jewish community and interactions and relationship to bring it into that forefront. It also exists as that term because when it comes to African American and Jews, when it comes to the term Black Jews, some of us accept it, some of us reject it the same way. That's a relationship around like Negro or colored, where for some, that's a fine term. For others, it's like just connecting us from a place of origin or relying on skin color as our identifying factor as opposed to culture, right? So Ashkenazi Jews, you know what that means. Sephardi Jews have a concept of culture. Black Jews doesn't tell you anything. It just tells you what the color is. Edot Chemdat, there's an African-American and cultured African diasporic aspect to how we interact with Judaism, how we show up, how we sing, how we pray, how we eat.
And I love this for so many ways. First of all, because I love taking an insider term and using it to identify and then having to explain ourselves because really, and we've talked about this, how few people actually understand anything about Judaism who aren't Jewish. You threw a whole bunch of terms out that will often require explanation. And there's the acronym that you used includes these terms secular, traditional, and orthodoxish or whatever, right? So Chiloni is secular. It's used for the Jews who don't observe anything in Israel. So it's an Israeli Hebrew term. which works really well. Mazorti is traditional, literally those who are involved in the transmission, which is basically in Israel also every Jew who's not Orthodox but still does something Jewish, although it's often identified with the conservative movement. But I like your broadening of it. And then Datim are really like the serious religious, whatever that means. And what you've done in doing this, Rabbi, is you've created a big tent that says we are Jewish attitudinally, culturally, regardless of where we are religiously. And I think that's incredibly powerful. I think what's really interesting is you have conversation at the same time in your book with the African American church.
Correct.
And I think what's really interesting, I've learned a whole lot more about African Americans in church in the last 5 years of my life than I ever thought I would know. And both with our colleague, Reverend Wiley, who was at Orchard Park Presbyterian. But one of the things that I learned from Reverend Denise, with whom I also work, is the degree to which the African American church is a saving, welcoming home for many African Americans. But the two of you are not really involved in the African American church. I feel like in this way, you also are very in touch with the insider-outsider dynamic of trying to hold space as a minority in a place that's supposed to be yours. I see from the looks on your face that I seem to have maybe identified something.
Just ministering in a non-Black church. The issue comes about of, how am I going to say this? In so many ways, it's about, at first, there's this enthusiasm. Oh, great. You're welcomed. We love change. We have that sense of community, being embraced, being accepted. But as time progresses, it becomes more of holding on to the traditional values of that church. In some, it all depends upon the people that you minister to. You as a Black female pastor, there comes a point where you can have influence to change the culture somewhat, but not 100%. And then there's this great resistance of your African American culture is more mystic, more the language that we use in our affirmation of who God is, that we trust him. They're like, logically, they just can't comprehend that. And so I had to begin to think about culturally what Black people experienced, and the difference in what white people experience is that they just always went to church because there's community there. There's that fellowship, there's that connection. For us, for Black people, going to church is where we expect God's presence. We expect God to show up. How's that? In that particular house of worship. It's just not community for us. It's that this great dependence that we really need God to help us. He's just not some entity that sits in heaven and looks down and controls us like we're on a chessboard or whatnot. For the African American church, it's about building that relationship with God. We need to identify ourselves as God's beloved children, and non-congregations do not. And so they get upset in our style of preaching because they call it passion. We call it, that's our relationship with God. We hear the heart of God. When he says, come to me, all you who, we express that over the pulpit. They just like, no, God can't accept everybody. When we talk about that God of the Old Testament, that there was consequences for their actions. They're like, no, how can a loving God do that? But from the Black perspective, we try to explain to them God's DNA is in us. So if God feels hurt, that's why we feel hurt. If we have anger, God feels anger. Some of those things, but then it gets weird. Some things we just have to bring them back and like, no, that's not God. You didn't hear all those voices at one time. So yeah, understand that you're right. There is the sense of when you were explaining the different terms, I was thinking of there's people who identify that there's a God somewhere. There's what I equate to as Christianity, where everybody thinks that, oh, yeah, I'm Christ-like. And then those are the religious people who really speak the language of and live the life of Christianity.
I would like to feel this is a universal Black, non-Black religious experience where I feel for, as African Americans and African diasporic people, there's just a natural gravitation to that more spiritual, more passionate, more mystical sort of connection and expectation.
Right.
Where we're not there as on a rote, read these lines, do these things. There's a feeling there, there's a passion there that I don't find in other non-Black sort of religious gatherings or interactions.
Rabbi, let me just insert, unless they're worshiping snakes. They have snakes in their services. Those extreme Pentecostals. Sorry.
So I think there's really something past the snake stuff. Although it'd be interesting, Rabbi, if we do a Moses and the staff snake reenactment for Passover at some point. But on this question of enthusiasm, I know in a lot of white synagogues, when the Black preacher shows up for Dr. King's weekend service, when we have somebody in the synagogue from the African American community, when the white rabbi goes and visits the Baptist church in town, there is a desire, a longing for some of that enthusiasm. I've been in synagogues where we brought the choir from the church. People want that enthusiasm, but how do we figure out a way to bring it genuinely without making it into a token, making it into, Rabbi, you express all the ways in which African American Jews are welcomed for their token status. Look, we've got one. Look, we've got this. And without getting that in order to make it not just welcoming, but not just inclusive, but fundamental, that we actually have to learn from each other and change what we do. Is there a movement in your communities towards, hey, this thing that is coming that isn't ours, we actually want to move towards it in a substantial way?
I can say the only time that truly happens if there is a crisis in the community. TOPS, for instance, right?
Just to explain, on May 14th, 2022, we had a terrible massacre of 10 African Americans at a local supermarket here in town called Tops. So when we say Tops or 514, it's code for that encounter. A guy came from south of Binghamton and targeted Buffalo in particular to slaughter Black people.
When we appreciated that experience was during the 514, when we all came together and we were all of the mindset and we were willing in that moment to pray to God together, collectively, sincerely, people from diverse backgrounds, to get a sense of peace, a sense of justice, to really inquire of God in that moment of what the next steps would be. But then after that homeostasis moment and we get some type of resolve, we go back to our normal disenfranchised lives, and this,
That post 9/11 sense of unity doesn't last all.
it doesn't last.
So when I think about what you're saying, the only way that we can have that becomes a norm within the church is the church has to want to learn the culture of the pastor that's not part of their community to understand where we're coming from. And it's something I talk about all the time with the congregation I'm at. You need to get to know who I am and where I come from, not looking for me to conform to who you are and what you do, because I'm not a conformist. And I have to say that I'm not a conformist. So how? Somewhere we have to find middle ground. And the only way to find that is you have to learn about your pastor. You have to learn about, where did I come from? How come I worship the way that I do? Telling me your passion really comes out, great. But are you changed by what you heard? Or are you studying for yourself? Do you understand why I react the way I do when certain things happen? They're like, you're just so calm. And that is part of, that's how I grew up. That's what I was taught. I was taught that by my parents and the congregation I was in as a child, that I don't have to be reactionary, that my dependence truly is on God, and prayer is a huge part of that. To many, it's foreign, but get to learn who I am. Then we can come to some middle ground where when the choir comes, it's not, oh boy, that was like the best thing ever. We need to do this again next year. No, this can be a part of what we do all the time if you just get to know us. Don't make assumptions. Start watching TV and actually have a conversation with me, or come with me to other places and see where I came from.
I can only begin to imagine all your experiences, Rabbi Rishon, of being brought in to lead a white group of Jews and your colleagues, because I know you're close with Rabbi Lawson in Reconstructionist movement as well. So what's it like trying to do this for Jews? Because it's a different kettle of fish.
It really at its core is not.
Okay.
I want to go back to what was said before about not going to church for, I think it was relation or community, that was said earlier. The difference, I think, between white church, black church, white synagogue, and black synagogue is that in white spaces, it never had to be fought for. We have to, it's not a communal space for us. It just handed to us, here's a prayer space. It had to be fought for. We had to figure out our own rituals and we were denied. It's a conscious showing up for God when we show up to these spaces, because there is no, or at least was no, community. It wasn't let me go here because I know I'll be welcome. It's I'm going here to lay everything out in front of God, because he sees what I'm going through. I need that strength. I need that succor. I need that comfort to keep moving and keep going. And I don't know if there's a possibility of non-Black spaces understanding or grasping our passion any more than it is trying to retrain people to clap on the 2s and 4s instead of the 1s and 3s. It's just something inherently felt, that there's a connection there that's born of the difficulties and struggles that we have consciously made to consciously connect with the divine, that doesn't exist in non-Black spaces because it's been assumed that it's theirs. Here's your church, here's your space, here's your congregation, come in. Where we had to overcome those. You can't come in here, you can't pray to God, you can't participate, you can't this. And they're saying, no, we're going to show up. We're going to find ways to show up, and show up in ways that only we can express. So I don't know if there's a way to teach that. I don't know if there's a way for that to be learned on a sort of visceral emotional level, that it can be absorbed and then practiced, as opposed to a sort of academic, logical, I understand why there's this passion, or why there's this music, or how the blues came to be. You can't ever feel how the blues came to be.
It's interesting. I wonder if Ohel Edot Chemdata, the congregation you're founding in DC, if your community therefore begins to change that, because I know in the Jewish world, sometimes we visit other synagogues and we say, oh, they do this thing there. I'd like to see it done here.
Really
You,
colonial when you think about it. Really colonial when you think about it. That's just, here's
well,
going to pop it here and let's pick this and create this thing.
but all art and creation is part appropriation, and which is a whole nother discussion. You mentioned the lacking of physical home of Edel Chemdata, right? That there's no black belt. There's no zip code that is where Black Jews hang out, right? You have identified a community that has connected via the internet and found each other. So is there a hope for that changing when suddenly you actually have a place?
Oh, absolutely. You need a home base to move from. I think that's large part of the struggle people have with the authenticity of African American Jews on either side, whether non-Black Jews or African American non-Jews, because it seems like we're just sprinkled in and don't have a sort of cogency. We don't have a, this is where we are, here's what we believe, here you can find us, and then you can find us in other places. We're just always sprinkled into other places. So it lends itself to those questions. Are you really this? Are you really that? Or are you just trying it on? Are you just moving through? Are you transient?
I feel like there's a huge authenticity question in everything we're talking about. And I feel it very much universalizes the experience. I know Jews, period, show up always with a chip on our shoulder about whether or not I'm Jewish enough. It's highlighted for African American Jews because, of course, there's this whole suspicion based on the way you appear. But almost every conversation I have with a person who, when they find out I'm a rabbi and they admit to me that they're Jewish, is I'm sorry I'm not more Jewish in some way. I'm sorry I don't go to synagogue more. I'm sorry I don't keep kosher more. They lead with the guilt and the authenticity insecurity question. Is there maybe a way of universalizing or declaring ourselves we are all inauthentically in it together and therefore we're all authentic? Is that a way in?
No.
Yeah.
I agree with that. No, circles are circles. Right?
Exactly. You just take the current climate, politically, whatever's happening in 2026, you can see the mindset that there's a certain circle, as the rabbi was saying, is so adamant on that our Christianity has to be based on our nationalism. While we were talking, I was thinking there used to be a time that, when you came across a rabbi and you were just leaning in your wild roots, you're sowing your oats, you know what I'm saying? You were just a wild child. There was a level of respect in that moment. You centered yourself and you came to a moment of decency is not the proper word, but you refrain from doing certain things in the presence of a rabbi or a minister. Now, people don't care. I have people sitting at my desk. They just no respect for the office of the minister. They say whatever they want to say, drink whatever they want to drink, do whatever they want to do. It's just not there anymore. So, no, as hard as we try, that I have nothing to say.
So, Rabbi, you alluded to the concrete unbreakability of this sort of authentic, inauthentic dialogue, which is that people are not going to give there. They're going to attach, this is my place of authenticity, and I'm going to continue to throw shade on everyone else's authenticity no matter what, right? I'm not going to accept that I've established that sort of that hard boundary out of my own insecurity about authenticity, right? Because I think that's where it comes from. I think I say I do X, Y, and Z according to the letter of the law, and therefore everybody doesn't. But there's always somebody who does more and somebody who does less. There's always somebody in Judaism, we often say everybody always either a heretic or a zealot, and I'm the only correct one. But that leaves us with 15 million individual Jews who don't have association with anybody as being in community. So our podcast is called What Our Faith Demands. We are action focused. Given all of this, when we go back to the people who listen to us most, to the people who hear this podcast, what do we do with this shared data of difficulty in order to make some progress?
You have to talk about it. You do. It needs to be a topic of conversation, whether it makes people feel good or not, or they feel uncomfortable. It has to be part of the conversation that isn't buried because someone feels uncomfortable and they want to change the subject.
So we need to go at the discomfort. It needs to be part of the conversation.
And it's not intentionally making people uncomfortable. It's talking about what needs to be talked about. And you can be a part of the conversation or not, but that's not going to stop the people who want to talk about it from talking about it in your presence. That's where I am with it now.
There can't be a level of conformity in all our areas of ministry. We have to maintain, in my case, the inherent passion that God has given me for that relationship that I have with him.
So I think what's really interesting is that the two of you serve Methodist churches.
Yeah.
So there's a strong identification of this is the way we do it. Rabbi Rishon, you and I have served a variety of different Jewish communities, but often they identify in a similar way. It's a Reform community, it's a renewal community, it's a Reconstructionist community, it's this type of Orthodox community or conservative community. You've now created a community identity where norms of Jewish practice are deliberately pluralist. So how do you grapple with this and ask people to show up in their discomfort and have them continue showing up in Ohel Edot Chandata?
I think the main piece that we need to name, which I think it works both here in synagogues and also in church, is the Eurocentric part. Because, for example, denominations are only an Ashkenazi construct. They don't exist outside the Ashkenazi space. And they're all defined in negatives, right? We don't do this. We don't believe in that. We don't. And I think Christian denominations work in a similar way. We don't. And if you're defining yourself in negative, you don't actually know what you are. And so I think that's what lends itself to that discomfort and that inauthenticity piece. I don't do this, and this is what makes me something. So if somebody else is doing this, or someone else says, I'm not this because this, and what am I? And the question that we really have are the what am I questions, because it's never come from a positive point. We are this denomination, and we do this, and we believe this, and this is how we do. It's also usually reactionary. They do this, we don't do that. They do this, we don't do this. And in come to Judaism specifically, how denominations or observance works differently in Ashkenazi space and say Sephardi spaces, where for Sephardim, let's say there's A, B, and C. And Sephardim will say, I just do A, I just do B, I do C, I do A and B, I do B and C, I do A and C. But A, B, and C are all inviolable tenets that we all agree on. In Ashkenazi spaces, I don't do A because A is no longer relevant. I don't do B because it no longer jives with the morality of whatever the state is. I don't do C because, oh, that was for a specific time or place. And so once you can negotiate whether A, B, and C are all relevant and authentic, that lends itself to a structure where you can continuously splinter, continuously break off, because then you can choose, oh, this doesn't apply, or that doesn't apply, or this. And so it breaks down. Where for Sephardim, you could find the most secular Sephardi tattoos, pork, all the things, right? When they show up to a Rosh Hashanah service, they expect what we'd identify as an Orthodox Rosh Hashanah service. And if it isn't, they're like, what is this? This isn't Judaism. Regardless of the fact that 99% of the year, they're not practicing sort of Judaism, but they're like, this is what it is, though. When I show up to a space, that's what I expect to see. where for Ashkenazim that sort of doesn't exist in that same way. And with Ashkenormativity and what is Ashkenaz being seen at what mainstream or baseline Judaism is, it creates those sort of cognitive dissonant sort of spaces. It creates those conflicts of authenticity and confidence and insecurity.
I love this paradigm that you're offering us because so Ashkenazi is Northern European Jews, Northern, Central, Western European Jews. Sfard is the word for Spain in Hebrew, and it basically accounts for all the Jews from Europe who are not those, right? So basically those who are originally from the Iberian Peninsula who spread out into North Africa and into southern Italy. Then, of course, there are other terms. There's Mizrahi, which is Middle Eastern.
Controversial, depends on who you're talking to and what country you're speaking in.
So Jewish identity is complicated. What's interesting and salient is that the white European Ashkenaz Jewish identity is driven by this paradigm that you identified so beautifully, Rabbi, which is that if I don't do it, it's not valid. As opposed to it's possible for us to do all these things. I'm going to do some of these some of the time, some of these others some of the time. But when I show up for synagogue, I expect it to be done all. And just because I don't do it all the time doesn't mean I'm a bad Jew. And I don't have to denigrate all these other things that I don't do as no longer relevant, which is the term you used. I thought that was really helpful because part of the issue is a difference between a live and let live approach or a my way or the highway approach, a self-justification by negating everyone else's way, which is very sort of Kantian Enlightenment European thinking, right? Either you think my way or you're stupid. As opposed to what we might identify as a less Eurocentric, a more world-based view, which relies on the reality of people living in groups near each other and still getting along without waging war against each other. That, oh yeah, they do it in that town. They do the A, B, and C, but they do it slightly differently, and it's fine. Is that a fair repackaging?
So we're specifically not engaging in the Ashkenazi denominational sort of structure. So while it might say on the website, a modern Orthodox traditionalist synagogue, that's why those two terms are used in conjunction, because it's a traditionalist synagogue in the same way that Sephardim practice traditionally. There's not really a Sephardi orthodoxy. Those are maybe Sephardim that are subsumed under the Ashkenazi hierarchy. So we also have modern Orthodox here as a cipher for people who don't understand or grasp that denominations are not universal across Judaism.
Interesting. What do you guys think about this? In your very Orthodox Methodist settings at the moment.
I think the ideology is still the same. It's a my way or the highway kind of mentality. And that I also was thinking that the slave mentality still exists. And even pastoring a non-black church is the idea that we were talking about it before about this elitism, or that you come in, you're the subordinate, or you want to think about it in other terms, I got the control, I will micromanage you. However you want to put it, the concept is still there, that I'm master, you slave, right? And master has to control everything. Master controlled his own house, he controlled the slave house, and that's still the ideology today. I control my house, I control the church, I control you. You preach what I want you to preach. You show up when I want you to show up. There really is no democracy or freedom, really, as a Black minister in an all-white congregation.
Wow.
I hate to say it, but I totally agree. That's what we agree with what she's saying. Is the experience, no matter if you're in the city as she is, and I'm in Niagara County, some people are living more undercover with it, right? They don't come right out. They do other things. They do it more subtle.
Passive aggressive.
it passive aggressive until you do something that really goes totally against what they would normally do.
The culture.
And then it's, wait a minute, we need to have a conversation.
Then all the committees get together and
I'm really curious as to what Rabbi Alyssa Stanton would say about this conversation as well. Rabbi Alyssa Stanton, first African-American female clergy reform, and was leading I think, all-white synagogue. So she experienced harassment, death threats, things of that nature, and her contract only lasted like a year, and they didn't renew the contract. So I feel like she'd say a lot of the same things that you're saying, that we're all saying right now.
The title of our podcast is What Our Faith Demands. And we try to come up with homework, as it were. We've done a couple of them about being better neighbors, about thinking what it means to love our neighbor, love ourselves, and love God. I think what I'm hearing, and I wonder, we've talked a lot about slave mentality and the slavocracy and the degree to which it is still part of everything we do. We have a shared vocabulary around Exodus, around liberation. It's got parlance in most of our communities. It's not shared with Muslims, but among the four of us, what does it mean for us to bring home not just a pause? Am I going to feel love of God in this moment? Not just a breath. How am I going to be a better neighbor in this moment? But a pause and breath and say, am I bringing an Exodus consciousness to this moment, as opposed to a slave mentality? An Exodus consciousness. Am I leaving Pharaoh behind for something else? And what does it mean to raise that in our conversations, to say, I hear what you're saying, and I hear what I just said, and I feel like there's too much Pharaoh in me right now. What happens if we leave that behind? Is that something we could work on?
yes, and I believe that we're doing it. Because if you use the Exodus story, Moses, what happened when he wanted to leave Pharaoh's house, right? And he saw the injustice that was happening against his own Hebrew sibling, but then he was judged again by his own fellow countrymen. And so he had to leave and depart. And I believe in that even Moses' own Exodus, he got clarity concerning Pharaoh. And how was he bold enough to come back to Pharaoh? Because why? He understood who Pharaoh was, what his house represented, understood the Pharisaic system, if you will.
The answer to Pharaoh is not more Pharaoh.
No, that sometimes you got to live in Pharaoh's house to understand Pharaoh, right? But then as you relate to your own siblings, there's this confusion. But sometimes you just have to step outside the box.
You got to go out into the desert and have a new teacher, a Jethro, to teach us what it means to be righteously together and not forcefully against.
I think we can't talk about slave mentality without also naming scarcity mentality, right? Because that also moves around there in those paradigms and it's comorbid. When discussing the Exodus story, I think we also have to keep in mind the Haggadah part, right? There's a point in Haggadah that says, if God had not freed us, then us, our children, and our children's children would still be slaves. What does that mean, really, right? And so there's a commentary that says, even if the Egyptians, for example, had come to a social consciousness moment and saying, oh, it's bad to have these Jews here as slaves, let's free them, right? Jews would have still had that stigma of being former slaves. People would say, oh, you used to be the Egyptian slaves, even if they were like fully free. Secondarily, if the Egyptians logic themselves into a social aha moment, they could easily logic themselves out of it. Oh, we've given these Jews too much freedom, let's cut back on those things. And so that's why I think, particularly that piece in the Haggadah has a different resonance for those of us who are African-American Jews, because we know what that difference is as African-Americans in this country. Because we still have that, oh, we used to own you, oh, you used to be slaves. We've seen we came to that socialization, you should have rights, And we're watching right now in real time that unfolds. Oh, we gave you too much rights. So let's take back Roe versus Wade. Let's gut the Civil Rights Act. Let's reintroduce gerrymandering and redlining. And so I think if we're going to bring the extive narrative into these conversations, we have to understand that it's not going to reach the same result or conclusion. The reason the Exodus was able to be the Exodus because there was a supernatural divine intervention into the system that was there. And if it's just us mortals working in this space, it's not going to really evoke or reach that same pinnacle, that same point. And it's practically impossible for it to. So to move through this work with that realization and not an unrealistic concept of what an end goal of that looks like.
You've just set off a whole host of light bulbs in my head. I often compare the Exodus narrative to our Constitution, that the Ten Commandments begin with, I am God, as a way of declaring the authority of the text. And our Constitution begins with, we the people. Enlightenment era equivalent of claiming authority. However, you just blew it apart, Rabbi, by saying that the problem with the Constitution is that we the people keep on saying, we'll change it here or there. And the we the people is who's included in the we the people who makes the decision. By not declaring an absolute about it, by submitting to the slavocracy that the Bill of Rights is an addendum, not the foundation of our document, which was a drastic shift in the US Constitution over our state constitutions. State constitutions start with rights, first and foremost, not Congress and the presidency and the courts, but rights first, because they are immutable. They are the foundation, the principles. But the American Constitution, the federal Constitution, has always been a compromise with slavocracy, has always been a compromise with power, has always been a compromise on who counts as we the people. And so thank you for that, because you just basically blew apart a whole host of half a dozen sermons of mine or more. So I appreciate that. But that being said, I think you've given us a real directive, which is, how do we take that Exodus consciousness, that sense that there is something absolute? There's something intrinsically mysterious, wondrous, and miraculous about every person we interact with. How can I not interact with them in a way that enslaves them or myself?
That depends upon the person you're talking to, really, again, because we all got free will. Again, we go back to Tanya's concept. We can talk, we can build relationships, but we cannot change people. We can educate them. But I think Rabbi, he hit on something as well, that we need this supernatural infusion to disrupt everything. So what does that look like? I don't know. But it seems to be the only way to change anything that's happening. Do we call it prayer? Do we lean more into our sacraments? I don't know, but there has to be a disruption, because the insanity just keeps us on this miracle.
Disruption. Yeah. Beyond us that's on this podcast is going to call for people to stand up for something and not be afraid. I've been just talking to too many people who they want to stand up, but they're afraid of repercussions of standing on something. What is going to cost them? If I do that, I'm going to lose this. And so how do you know you're going to lose that? If you already have it set in your mind that you're going to lose it, then you've already lost it. That's just how I see it. Then it's gone. But what if you actually stood up and you see there's other people standing up and addressing the same issues, calling it out? Imagine that. Let's see what happens. If we are, as a united front, said, no more.
So can we agree that in our next week, we're going to self-disrupt for the sake of Exodus something in ourselves, in our conversations, because how much more powerful, this is a great add-on. Instead, we had asked to do a little self-love. Now, maybe we're going to ask to do a little self-disruption. How can I stand up in a disruptive, faithful way that says, I'm going to do this thing and I'm not going to be alone. I'm going to have faith that I'm not doing this alone.
We do it all the time. And I'm just saying, we do it all the time because of
I'm an Aquarius. That's just my brand, right?
To us.
So with that, I want to bring us together in a moment of blessing and acknowledgement and gratitude. I'm grateful to be a free person with the three of you, because I am liberated by the three of you. Liberated to Rabbi Rishon to totally learn something new and tear apart something that I had relied upon before, to self-disrupt, to be open to the fact that God is in this place and I did not know it. Because it's only when we show up accepting the possibility that God is in this place and we don't know how yet, that we will be transformed, that we will see ourselves as free to stand up and disrupt together. I really want to thank the three of you for showing up and disrupting me today in the best of ways. And we look forward to our next episode. And thank you again to A More Perfect Union for supporting us.